There is a particular kind of betrayal that does not arrive with raised voices or slammed doors. It arrives quietly, in the middle of an ordinary moment, dressed as something harmless, a comment, a joke, a piece of private information shared in public as though it belonged to everyone. You do not realize it is a betrayal until you see the face of the person it was done to, and then you cannot unsee it. Steve Harvey has hosted Family Feud long enough to have developed a finely calibrated sense of when something real is happening in his studio. He knows the difference between nervous laughter and genuine distress. He knows when a contestant's tears are joy and when they are something else entirely. He has, over 14 years of tapings, developed the particular instinct of a man who has spent his life reading rooms, sensing the invisible things that move between people before those things become visible. On a Thursday afternoon in the early months of 2024, something happened on that stage that stopped Steve Harvey mid-sentence, not because of what a contestant said, because of what a husband chose to reveal about his wife on live television, in front of hundreds of people that she had never intended anyone else to know. The audience went silent. The production crew went still. Steve Harvey stood at the center of his stage and for several seconds said absolutely nothing at all, because there was nothing that could be said that would undo what had just been done. There was only what came next, and what came next was entirely up to him. What he chose to do in those next minutes has been described by viewers, by television critics, and by people who study human behavior professionally as one of the most quietly powerful moments in the show's history, not because it was dramatic, because it was true. Her name was Evelyn Marsh, 59 years old, a woman who carried herself with the measured composure of someone who had learned, through long experience, that composure was its own form of strength. Evelyn had grown up in Birmingham, Alabama, the second of 5 children. Her father had worked in insurance, her mother had been a church choir director, and their household had operated on a clear set of values. You worked hard. You kept your private business private, and you showed the world your best self because the world did not need to carry your burdens along with its own. These were not lessons taught in classrooms. They were demonstrated daily, in the way her parents moved through difficulty without advertising it, in the way her mother could stand in front of a congregation every Sunday morning looking as if nothing was wrong, regardless of what the week had contained. Evelyn had taken that inheritance seriously. She had become a licensed clinical social worker, spending 33 years in child protective services, a field that demands precisely the qualities her upbringing had cultivated in her: the capacity to absorb difficult realities without being destroyed by them, the discipline to maintain composure in the presence of other people's pain, the deep, sustained conviction that what a person has survived does not define them unless they allow it to. She had married her husband, Robert, 30 years earlier. He was an engineer, methodical, analytical, a man who organized the world into systems and categories and generally preferred to know where everything stood. In the early years of their marriage, this had complemented Evelyn's warmth. He provided structure, she provided feeling. Together they had raised a son, Marcus, and a daughter, both of whom were in their late 20s now and had come to the Family Feud taping with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of children who loved their parents and wanted to do something that made their mother happy. What the children knew, and what no one outside the family was supposed to know, was that Evelyn had been carrying something privately for the past 3 years. She had been diagnosed with an anxiety disorder following a particularly brutal stretch at work that had involved a child welfare case, with an outcome she would carry with her for the rest of her life. She had sought help, done the work, and made meaningful progress. She was, by any honest measure, in a good place, but she had been careful about who knew, in her profession, in her community. In the context of a woman of her generation who had built her identity around steady capability, mental health was still a subject she navigated with deliberate privacy. She had told Robert because he was her husband. That was the whole of why she had told him, because he was supposed to be the one person on earth whose knowledge of her difficulty made her safer, not more exposed. She arrived at the Family Feud studio that Thursday afternoon, feeling light in a way she had not felt in a while, genuinely, uncomplicated light. Her children were beside her. The studio was bright and warm. Steve Harvey came out before the taping to greet the families, and she laughed at something he said and thought. In that particular way that good moments prompt you to think, this is good. Right now, this is genuinely good. She had no way of knowing what Robert was about to do with what she had trusted him with. The Marsh family was composed and coordinated in competition. Marcus had his father's precision and his mother's warmth in almost equal measure. He answered quickly and with confidence, and when an answer missed, he shrugged and moved forward with the easy grace of someone who does not require perfection of himself. Yvonne was sharper, funnier, quicker to read the audience, and she used it, earning genuine laughter twice in the main game in ways that built the crowd's goodwill toward the family as a whole. Evelyn herself was assured at the podium, unhurried. The 3 decades of professional practice in staying present under difficult circumstances had given her a stillness under pressure that read, on camera, as quiet confidence. She answered her rounds methodically, and when the main game concluded, the Marsh family had accumulated enough points to advance with room to breathe. It was during the pre-fast money segment, the brief, unstructured conversational exchange that Steve Harvey has with families before the final round begins, that everything changed. Steve was doing what he does in those moments. Light, curious, genuinely interested, drawing people out in the casual way of someone who actually likes talking to strangers. He had been speaking with Robert, asking about his work, and Robert had been answering with the expansive confidence of a man who was enjoying himself. The audience liked him. He was articulate and funny in a dry way, and the energy between him and Steve Harvey had been easy. Then Steve turned to the family generally and asked a question he has asked hundreds of times. The kind of question that usually produces warm, simple answers. Who in this family surprises you the most? Who has a side to them that people wouldn't expect? A comfortable question, an invitation to say something affectionate and amusing about a family member. Robert looked at Evelyn, and he said, with the light, offhand manner of someone sharing a charming anecdote, Evelyn surprises me. You'd never know it looking at her, but she actually struggles with anxiety. She's been in therapy for 3 years now. He smiled at her, apparently under the impression he was saying something supportive. She's done a lot of work. I'm proud of her. The sentence landed in the studio the way a glass lands when it falls from a table and shatters. The sound sharp and sudden, followed by a silence in which everyone in the room is still processing what just happened. Evelyn's face did not collapse. It did something more devastating than collapse. It went perfectly, utterly still. The stillness of a woman who has been trained by decades of professional practice to absorb it, be shocks without displaying them, now absorbing the largest shock her marriage had ever delivered in what was perhaps the most public moment of her life. Marcus, standing at her side, looked at his father with an expression that was beyond anger. It was the expression of a person who has watched something irreversible occur and is already living in the world where it cannot be undone. Yvonne looked at the floor. Steve Harvey said nothing. He was still holding his microphone. He was looking at Evelyn. He was doing what the best interviewers and hosts learn to do in moments of genuine crisis. He was waiting, and he was watching, and he was thinking. Robert appeared to register the silence approximately 3 seconds after it began. His smile faded slowly, the way a light fades when the power has been cut. Not instantly, but with the unmistakable knowledge that it is going. I just meant, he started. Steve held up one hand. Not urgently, just this clearly the hand that means not yet. He walked to Evelyn. He stood in front of her, close enough that it was a private conversation even though 200 people were listening to every word of it. And he said, quietly, "You doing okay?" Evelyn looked at him. Her eyes were bright, but her voice, when it came, was steady. "I'm fine," she said. And then, after a pause, "I wasn't planning to be on television with that information, but I'm fine." The truth of what had just happened settled over the room like weather. Steve Harvey stood in the center of his stage and looked at the audience for a long moment. Then he looked at the camera, and then he began to speak in the way he speaks when the game show has left the building and the person has taken its place. "I need everybody to stay with me for a second," he said, "because something just happened here that I'm not going to walk past." The studio was completely quiet. This woman, he gestured toward Evelyn, and his voice carried the kind of respect that does not need volume to be felt, came here today to spend time with her children and do something that made her happy. That's it. That's what she came for. And something that belonged to her, something she shared with her husband in private, just got put into this room without her permission. He let that sentence stand alone for a moment. "Now, I'm not here to prosecute anybody," he said, looking briefly at Robert. "I believe you thought you were saying something kind. I do. But here is what I need every husband, every wife, every partner watching right now to understand. What your person tells you in private is not yours to share. It belongs to them. They gave it to you because they trusted you with it, not because they wanted it to belong to everyone." The audience applauded, and it was the kind of applause that comes from recognition rather than entertainment. Anxiety is not a weakness, Steve continued. I want to say that out loud. Clearly, on this stage, seeking help is not a weakness. Doing the work, the real work of taking care of your own mind, is one of the hardest and most courageous things a human being can do, and this woman has been doing it for 3 years. He turned to Evelyn. 3 years, while working, while raising children who clearly turned out just fine, while being a wife, while being a professional. You did all of that at the same time as you were taking care of yourself. There is nothing about that that is anything other than remarkable. Evelyn pressed her lips together. She was holding herself together with great discipline, and she was succeeding. And the discipline itself was visible and moving. Can I ask you something? Steve said. She nodded. In your work, 33 years, Child Protective Services, what did you try to give the people you served? What was the thing you wanted them to leave with? Evelyn thought for a moment. When she answered, her voice was clear. The understanding that asking for help is the beginning of something, not the end of something. The room responded immediately. Deep, sustained applause. Steve Harvey nodded slowly. The beginning of something, he repeated. You've been telling other people that for 33 years, and you practiced what you preached. He looked at her directly. There is not a single person in this building who should hear what was just said about you and think anything other than that you are a strong woman. Because what you did took strength. It took more strength than pretending you were fine would have. He turned, finally, to Robert. His tone did not become cold, but it became precise. The tone of someone speaking to a person who is capable of understanding exactly what is being said and should therefore not be protected from it. You love your wife, Steve said. It was not a question. Robert said, completely. Then you owe her something right now. Not later, not at home, not in private. Right now, in front of all these people, because that's where it happened. He stepped back slightly, creating space between them. What do you want to say to her? Robert looked at his wife. The easy confidence he had carried throughout the afternoon was entirely gone, replaced by something undefended and raw. I didn't think, he said. Honestly, I thought I was saying I was proud of you. I didn't think about what I was doing. His voice tightened. I'm sorry. I am so sorry. What you shared with me, that was yours. I had no right to make it public. I am sorry. Evelyn listened to her husband with the same steady attention she had brought to every difficult moment in her professional life. When he finished, she said, thank you for saying that. It was not a full forgiveness. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. It was the dignified, considered response of a woman who had been wronged and who would decide, in her own time and in her own way, what came next. And the quiet authority of that response, the refusal to perform either devastation or absolution on someone else's schedule, was more powerful than either would have been. Steve Harvey let the moment breathe. Then he said, are you ready to win your family some money? Evelyn straightened. She smoothed her jacket. She looked at her children, who were looking at her with the particular expression children wear when they are proud of their parent in a way that has nothing to do with performance. She said, I've been ready. She went to the podium. She answered all 5 fast money questions with complete composure and won the family $20,000. The audience gave her a standing ovation that lasted until Steve Harvey had to gently, laughingly, ask everyone to please sit down. The episode aired on a Wednesday night, and by Thursday morning it had generated more conversation than any Family Feud episode in recent memory. Not about the game, not about the prize, but about what had happened in the minutes between the game and the money, about privacy and trust and the specific vulnerability of sharing something difficult with someone you love. Mental health professionals were among the first to respond in significant numbers. Therapists, counselors, and psychiatrists shared the clip across professional networks with commentary that was almost uniformly the same in substance, if not in phrasing. This was an example, rare in mainstream media, of someone with a large platform treating mental health disclosure not as revelation, but as information that belonged to the person who had done the disclosing. Steve Harvey's words, seeking help is the beginning of something, not the end of something, were reproduced in clinical waiting rooms, posted in therapy office windows, and cited in at least 3 separate mental health awareness campaigns within the month following the episode. Women of Evelyn's generation responded with a particular intensity. The specific combination of factors in her story, professional accomplishment, private struggle, a lifetime of cultural condition, towards self-sufficiency, and the particular violation of having something intimate shared without consent resonated with an audience that rarely saw its own experience reflected in popular culture with that degree of accuracy. A social worker in Memphis wrote a piece for a regional magazine that began, "I have spent my career helping other people talk about things they are ashamed of. I have spent my personal life learning to talk about my own. What I watched on Family Feud last week was a man in public taking that right away from his wife, and another man in public giving it back to her. Both of those things mattered." Robert Marsh made no public statements. He did not seek to explain himself or manage the narrative. His daughter Yvonne later said, in a brief interview she gave on behalf of the family, that her father had understood immediately after the taping that what he had done was a serious breach of trust and had not tried to minimize it. "He knew," she said simply. "He knew before Steve Harvey said anything. He just hadn't thought before he spoke. And that is a thing you cannot fix by thinking about it afterward. You can only do the work that comes after." Evelyn herself gave one interview, 3 months after the episode aired, to a podcast focused on mental health in professional communities. She spoke with the unhurried precision of a woman who had thought carefully about what she wanted to say and had no interest in saying more than that. She said that the experience had been, in the immediate aftermath, genuinely painful, not because of the audience's response, which had been overwhelmingly kind, but because of the specific feeling of losing control over her own story at a moment when she had not chosen to surrender it. She said, however, that something had shifted for her in the weeks that followed. "I spent 3 years being careful about who knew," she said, "and then everyone knew all at once, and I could not undo it. And what I found was that the world did not end. The thing I had been protecting against, judgment, diminishment, the loss of how people saw me, none of that happened. What happened instead was that people I had known for 20 years came to me and told me things they had been carrying alone. Colleagues, friends, people from my church." She paused. "I did not choose to open that door, but I am not sure I would close it now if I could." Steve Harvey returned to the episode in an interview conducted for a long-form profile published later that year. He said the moment that had stayed with him most was not the confrontation with Robert, but what Evelyn had said when he asked what she tried to give the people she served. She said, "Asking for help is the beginning of something." That sentence came from 33 years of watching people do the hardest thing, admit they needed something they didn't have. She had been saying that to other people her whole career, and she had lived it herself. When she said it, I thought, this woman is who she says she is. That is not something you can fake. He said, "The thing I hope people took from that day is not the drama of it. The drama is not the point. The point is that what a person shares with you in trust is a sacred thing. You do not get to decide when it becomes public. They do, always, no exceptions." Evelyn Marsh retired from Child Protective Services at the end of that year after 33 years of service. At her retirement, her supervisor read aloud the commendations that had accumulated in her file over 3 decades. A file that took the supervisor nearly 8 minutes to summarize. In attendance were former colleagues, former clients who had grown into adults and come back to say so, and her family. Marcus gave the final toast. He said his mother had spent her career teaching people that vulnerability was not the opposite of strength, but its prerequisite. He said she had taught him that by example, every day, in ways he had not fully understood until he was old enough to name them. And he said that whatever else had come from that Thursday afternoon in a television studio, the thing he would carry from it was the image of his mother standing at the Fast Money podium, composed, clear-eyed, completely herself and winning. She didn't need Steve Harvey to defend her, Marcus said. She was always going to be fine. What Steve Harvey did was remind the rest of us that she deserved better than what she got. There's a difference, and she is exactly the kind of woman who deserves to have that difference named out loud. Evelyn, seated in the front row, looked at her son and said nothing. She did not need to. The expression on her face said everything that 33 years of quiet, serious, patient, unglamorous, but consequential work had made her, and it was more than enough.